financial arguments in favour of buying a used EV are very strong. There may still be a price premium compared to the petrol or diesel equivalent, but that premium will be much smaller than when both cars were new. And of course you still get all the advantages of much lower running costs, very cheap fuel, zero road tax and much lower servicing costs. And in fact, for used EVs, the advantages of lower servicing costs tend to be even greater than for new EVs, because when vehicles are new, even petrol and diesel tend to be very reliable and the warranty covers most costs if anything comes up. But as vehicles begin to age, that's when the lower servicing costs of the EVs really start to come into play. When you're buying a used EV, just be really careful that you know exactly what you're buying, particularly the size of the battery measured in kilowatt hours and the charging rates measured in kilowatts. For example, the original Leaf came with a 24 kilowatt hour battery. A couple of years later, the vehicle looked the same on the outside, but Nissan started putting in a 30 kilowatt hour battery. The size of the battery in the Zoe has more than doubled over the years, but that's not necessarily immediately obvious from the outside. And in some cases, the manufacturers have always sold the vehicles with two options. For example, the Hyundai Kona is well known for a 64 kilowatt hour version with a very good range, but Hyundai also sell a smaller battery 39 kilowatt hour version. And charging speeds measured in kilowatts have tended to creep up over the years, both in terms of how fast you can charge on AC, what you're likely to do at home or in town, and on DC, which is the rapid chargers. Make sure the EV you're buying has got enough range for you, of course. And EVs, as they age, the battery capacity tends to reduce slightly, so the range will fall off a bit. But the bigger issue is that if you're buying a used EV, if it's an older model, it will quite likely have a lower range than today's EVs. Looking at the range stated on the display will give you some idea. For example, if it says 100 miles and it says the battery is 50% charged, then of course you know you've got a 200-mile range. But remember, that also reflects recent driving style, so it won't necessarily reflect the range that you're going to get out of the vehicle. But that will depend very much on how you drive it and particularly how fast you drive it. Depending on your budget, you may not be able to afford an EV that works for you as your only car, but you might be able to buy an EV that works well for you as a second car. Or I'd suggest you might be able to turn that on its head. You might be able to buy an EV that works well for you as your first car, as in it's the one that you're going to use day in, day out for the vast majority of your journeys, but in conjunction with a petrol or diesel, perhaps an older petrol or diesel that you use for the occasional longer journey. EVs tend to be very reliable, and certainly when I bought a used EV 3 years ago, I felt more confident buying that than I would have been buying the equivalent at the same age, petrol or diesel. The electric motors themselves tend to be extremely reliable, and of course you've got no clutch, you've got no gearbox, but of course things can go wrong, so be aware and do your usual checks. You want to look at the service history if you can, the bodywork, the tyres, consider the suspension, the steering, check the brakes, even though they tend to take less wear and tear than in a conventional vehicle. And if possible, buy from a dealership that's a member of the Electric Vehicle Approved scheme. That's a government-backed scheme that ensures the dealership really knows what they're talking about with EVs. Check that your EV comes with at least one cable. As a minimum, you need the type, it's got a Type 2 connector. It's what you'd use to plug the vehicle into an EV charge point at home or an EV charge point in town. And an EV may also come with a second cable, one that has a conventional 3-pin plug on the end, although it's not recommended to use those too frequently. Good idea to look for online communities, and there are lots of them for EVs, so EV owner groups, just to see if there are any particular known issues with the model of EV that you're considering buying. If your budget is less than £5,000, you're unlikely to be able to find an EV. But for about £5,000, you could probably find a Mitsubishi i-MiEV, Citroën C0 or Peugeot Ion. They're all the same car with different badges. They have about a 50-mile range, so really that's very much the entry point of EVs. Or for that similar sort of budget of about £5,000, you might find a Leaf or a Zoe, but at that price range, the Leaf or the Zoe would come with leased batteries. So you'd buy the vehicle, but you'd also inherit the battery lease, meaning you'd then pay £40 to £50 per month ongoing to lease the battery. And at the other end of the price range, perhaps if you're looking for an EV 1 to 2 years old, for a start you'd have a lot more choice, because 1 to 2 years ago there was a lot more different models of EV on the market. They would go a lot further, tend to have bigger batteries, faster charging speeds, and yet you'd still get some significant financial savings compared to the new EV. And the other big advantage of buying used at the moment, we're filming this in June 22, is the immediate availability of used EVs. Most new EVs at the moment have long waiting lists, 6 to 12 months is common. So the fact that you can go and buy a used EV tomorrow is quite an appeal in itself.